Welcome to this week's episode of the Every Arkansan Podcast. I'm Drew Davis, and this week I've got my friend Dr. Jackson sharing her story and her dream of seeing every child in Arkansas reading on grade level. Dr. Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule just to sit with us and kind of share how you've kind of progressed towards your God-given dream. So just start off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Drew. It's great to be here with you today. Just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Little Rock, born and raised here, graduate of Hall High, proud warrior. I'm excited to be here with you today. I am one of three children and enjoyed my time growing up here in the city of Little Rock. I attended Little Rock Public Schools, enjoyed my experiences there, and throughout my lifetime, I think I knew at some point I would do something related to education. I'm also married. I'm married to Troy Jackson. I have 2 kids, and so I enjoy being a wife and a mother, and I am a member of St. Mark Baptist Church here in Little Rock. And I currently serve as Executive Director of Our Kids Read. It's a literacy nonprofit here in Little Rock.
Part of your story that I was reading about, you were a first-generation college student?
Yes, I definitely was. So I attended Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas.
Double warrior?
Yes, double warrior, orange and black all day, every day. And I enjoyed my time as a college student. But one of the things that when you asked me about hurdles in the prescript that I thought about was thinking about being a first-generation college student. Neither of my parents had college degrees when I went on to college. And so one of the things that I dealt with as a hurdle was thinking about what is the search process like for finding an institution to go to? How do I apply? What do I do when I'm there? And luckily, I had a great high school counselor at Hall High School that really helped to encourage me and my friends to think about the college search and what that meant for us. I also had a family that was supportive. My parents really did insist on all of us receiving a college degree. And so because of their support, my counselor's support, and my circle of friends, it really helped me not only get into Hendrix College, but to also think about my path forward from there. So my time there, I really had that support of my family, encouraging me even when times were difficult. As a biology major, it's sometimes difficult to accomplish everything that you need to accomplish, but my parents insisted that I was going to get that degree and that I was going to finish it in 4 years. They insisted on that too. And so we really worked as a community between my family, my church community at St. Mark, to really encourage and push me to complete my degree at Hendrix.
Now, that time of going to high school in Little Rock was a very chaotic time. I mean, it was kind of the height of the gang culture and the violence culture and so many things like that. What kind of drove you to go into college and saying education after you're seeing what's going on in that world at that time?
So I do recall a lot of that. One of the things I didn't mention is, I went to Hall High School, but I also went to Horace Mann, where my mother actually graduated from high school. Okay. And so thinking about the shifts in culture that were happening in our district at that time is actually quite interesting, because that's when a lot of busing began to happen for desegregation of our schools, with the magnet schools coming on board. And one of the things for me as a student, both at Horace Mann and Hall, that I became very familiar with, and even in elementary school, was the differences in the opportunities that students had across our city and even in our nation. I was kind of keenly aware of that early on in life. And one of the things that was important to me was to consider thinking about equity issues. And so I have to quite honestly say, though, I did not think about becoming an educator until later in my college career. I entered Hendrix, as most science majors, pre-med. And unlike one of my good friends who's now a middle school principal, she decided like 2 days into the semester that she was not going to be pre-med. But I instead went into my sophomore year thinking I wanted to be pre-med. And it wasn't until I took Dr. James Jennings' course on history of education at Hendrix that I thought, I love this. I'm passionate about this. I mean, it was one of the first times that I actually took a course and I was doing extra work for the course because I was so enthused by what I was learning. And that's what really set me on a trajectory of thinking about my experiences in school, my friends' experiences in school, what I knew some of our community members experienced and thinking about how can I work to promote educational equity. And so I will say my educational equity journey began my sophomore year. The moment it clicked in my brain that teaching is something that I wanted to do. And I never will forget, the one thing that I was very concerned about was telling my parents that I wanted to be a teacher instead of a doctor. And they were the last ones who knew, because I had told my mentor who was teaching the course, and he switched over my degree plan. But I kept thinking, how am I going to tell my parents? How am I going to tell my community? I think this will let them down. And I don't know why I felt that. I think for so much in the Black community, oftentimes, especially for my generation, if you were going to go into a profession and be successful, often what was promoted was being a lawyer or a doctor. And so science major, doctor. And so I remember calling my mom to tell her that I wanted to become a teacher and minor in education. And her exact words were, "I'm glad you finally figured that out." And I said, "You could have saved me a lot of grief these last 2 years." She was like, "But sometimes in life you have to discover those things for yourself." She just reminded me, you have always worked with kids at church, in our community, whether you were doing Sunday school, whether you were doing Bible studies or community events, whether you were tutoring kids at local churches. You have always had this passion for education and teaching others. And she said, "I'm glad you discovered that."
And then it didn't stop just with college and first generation college student. You went all out into the
Yes.
I mean, to even to the doctorate level. So
Yes.
what kind of led you to continue that down that path?
One of the things I will tell you is that my life is a story of being willing to take opportunities that come to me without really thinking about what are the risks. And I know that can be scary sometimes, but I sometimes talk to my best friend about having this crazy faith, where when these opportunities come and you think about the trajectory you want to go and what it would allow you to accomplish in your community, you just say, "I have to do this." And so when I stopped teaching in the Little Rock Public Schools, I began working at Hendrix College as an academic counselor. I started our Office of Academic Support. And at that time, I got married and also had my first child. And I began to look at the faculty around campus. And one of the things I began to think about was, oh, this is a pretty good gig. They teach in the fall and the spring. They have summers off. I was like, I think I would like to do that. And I remember my mentor in the Little Rock Public Schools, Dr. Marion Lacey, once telling me, you do need to get your doctoral degree eventually. And so I remember thinking about that and just really thinking this might be an opportune time to do that. And so the opportunity presented itself for me to go on to Baylor University to complete my doctoral work. My husband and I had never visited or spent time in Waco, Texas, but one of the things that we had considered was the fact that we had a long time between now and retirement. And were the things that we were doing at that point the things that we wanted to do in life in the future? And so for us, making that decision to sell our home, move with a 3.5-year-old to Waco, Texas, was this kind of crazy faith that came about. We were in our early 30s. Our friends thought we were crazy. But I will tell you that it was one of the best decisions that we've ever made. Both of us left Texas with new degrees, new career paths, and it really actually provided a great opportunity for us to draw closer in our marriage also, because we only had each other. And so it was a great opportunity for us. And so I'm thankful for people like Dr. Lacey and others who said, you should get this degree. And for support that I received from Hendrix and from Baylor to be able to do that. That meant a lot to me.
And then it kind of has gone full circle, that passion that your parents put in your heart, that college is not an option, it is something you will do. It kind of goes hand in hand with your movement from academic world to the hands-on grassroots world, so to speak.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that move from on staff at Hendrix to Our Kids Read, because I think that's that magical aha moment for you. So
it definitely is, and that's just another story of faith. For me, I have thoroughly in the past enjoyed working at Hendrix. It's my alma mater. And so I served 9 years there on faculty and then ended my last 3 years there as Chief Diversity Officer. It was a wonderful leadership opportunity that I know if I had not had those 3 years of experience, you wouldn't be sitting here today talking to me as Executive Director of Our Kids Read, because much of what I've learned as a leader, I learned as a Chief Diversity Officer at Hendrix. And so making that leap was actually a leap of faith. And I remember our former executive director's wife telling me after the fundraiser in April, I know that this was a major leap of faith for you, and I'm grateful that you have done this. And for me, it was 9 years of commuting and the toll that that began to take on my family, and thinking about, did I want to do this another 5 or 9 years? Or did I want to press pause for a while, think about the fact that I have a 10th grader and a 4th grader, and really have some good time with my son before he graduates and goes to college, and to spend more time with my daughter, especially during those middle school years. And so for me, it was a decision, a leadership decision that brought me back home. I have to tell you, the other thing that began to resonate with me, Drew, was thinking about Frank Scott's mayoral campaign. I could continue to hear him talking about Little Rock being home and serving Little Rock. And that was another thing that began to resonate with me. I've spent 13 years of my career actually at Hendrix and in Conway, but Little Rock has always been home. We chose to come back to Arkansas and to Little Rock because it is home, and we have always had our home here. And so for me, it's an opportunity to really think about, how can I lead in a way to better serve my community? And when I saw the job position the third time for Our Kids Read, I stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning completing the application because I knew that I just finally had to make the decision that being at home, serving Central Arkansas and the state of Arkansas in a role to promote literacy, is something that's very important to me as an educator. And I just knew that this was a perfect intersection of my passion for educational equity, my love for my home city, and the love for my state.
So, Our Kids Read, one of the real focuses on getting on grade level by the 3rd grade.
Yes.
So why is that so important?
Oh, that is so important because we talk about this phrase, learning to read so you can read to learn. And oftentimes people talk about learning to read by 3rd grade so you can read to learn as you go through your journey. One of the things that I often share with people, though, is that you still continue to learn to read. Because even when I went to college, learning to read college textbooks was so different from reading textbooks in high school. And so thinking about learning to read by 3rd grade, though, we emphasize that because many of our markers for thinking about the trajectory students will go on will be by 3rd grade. So it's thinking about that early literacy in early childhood. So thinking about birth to 5 years old, and are individuals reading to their kids, even when they're in their womb, when they're born, and all the way through their time as a toddler. But then also thinking about what happens when they're in pre-K or kindergarten all the way through 3rd grade is important, because we can then begin to track how they're doing, how we need to help them to improve. And so those literacy scores at that grade level are truly important.
And I mean, one of the things we have to back into with what we do with after school and all that is this long-term approach. We want to see kids graduate on time. And 3rd grade reading level is one of those key components that actually finishing high school or moving to college or not ending up in prison or whatever, being on grade level has that much impact in the 3rd grade to define a lot of your future.
And oftentimes when I talk to business individuals about the impact of Our Kids Read, we talk about that. We talk about graduation rates and the effect that dropout rates have on our economy. And the reality is, if we can get early literacy in place, we see an increase actually in our graduation rates and individuals going into the workforce, and that's what we want to see for the state of Arkansas.
And I think that's huge, because I remember Bob Merriweather was one of the first classes I had in college at Hendrix, and I remember the back of my notebook, I would write down the words that I had no clue what they were. And learning how to look up those words in a dictionary was something that it put in me when I was a little kid.
Right.
And so many of the kids today, if they don't understand it, they'll just kind of shake their head and move on, versus having that desire to continue that reading after the third grade, into high school, into college, into the work world.
When I think about my kids who are now 4th and 10th grade, one of the things that I begin to think about is how people in the community continue to ask them, what are you reading? What have you read that's interesting to you? Keep reading. And I like that individuals do that, because literacy does not stop at 3rd grade. It's just the beginning. And so even for us as adults, continuing to read our newspapers, our journals and magazines, books, those things are so important to continue to hone and sharpen our skills for reading and literacy. It helps also with our ability to speak and to think about our vocabulary. And so all of those things are very important for us.
And one of the other things that you kind of talked about earlier was the importance of mentors and relationships in your life. And really what our kids read is almost like a mentorship.
Yes.
And so just, can you talk about that, just how it's impacted your life and then how it works with our kids?
Okay, wonderful. I've already mentioned 2 of my mentors in this conversation, and I've mentioned them and my parents and my family and my church community because I know that they're my village, and I know the importance of those relationships in that village. And so one of the things that I often talk about with mentoring is the fact when individuals, so I come in contact with a lot of college students or young adults, and one of the things I always talk about, I ask them, who's your mentor? And why is that person your mentor? Or can I help you find a mentor? Because mentoring is so important. One of the things that we talked about earlier is the fact that relationships are key in life. They can help our trajectory in life. One of the things I always talk about is the fact that when I went to Baylor and the connections, people knowing folks at Hendrix and knowing that me coming from Hendrix, I was prepared, like those relationships are important. And so one of the things that I encourage people to think about is how do you find effective mentors and how do you keep those relationships open? But then on the flip side, you get to be my age or our age, then you start seeing yourself becoming more of a mentor and having less mentors. Unfortunately for me, I've lost 2 of my major mentors, Dr. Jennings and Dr. Lacey. But for me, I began to realize on this path that although I have lost them, it's now my responsibility to do what they did for me. And so thinking about the young adults that I have an opportunity to mentor, even thinking about my marriage relationship with my husband and how we work with other married couples to help mentor them, those things are very important. And I will tell you, my successes are because of the individuals who sowed seeds into my life. Early on, even now, that's why I'm where I am today. And so when you talk about the tutoring mentorship relationship, we also call it sometimes a tutor mentor, because the reality of what our tutors do is the fact that we have the opportunity to really go into our community and actually mentor 2 kids a year. And so a lot of people are like, oh, you're reading a book, but our tutors also hear about what's going on in their homes, hear about what's going on in the schools. They provide feedback to them about what's coming up next on their science tests. And so they have those great relationships with their students. And I would argue, especially from the students and their families' sake, a lot of our students would probably argue, I just really like having my mentor, my tutor, and the relationship. Oh, and then the added bonus is I get to improve in my literacy. Now, our focus is literacy and improving that, but I would argue that it's because of the relationships that our tutors have with our students. That's why we're able to see the gains that we're seeing in students when it comes to literacy. Just the other day, I was on the phone with one of our tutors who was talking about going back to Terry Elementary School. And she was saying, my student is doing so well that I don't think that they're going to place us with her again. And when she said that, I started cracking up, and she said when she started, she was having reading difficulties. By my 2nd year with her, she was doing so much better. Last year was my 3rd year with her, and they gave me special permission to be with her just because she requested to be back with me. And so she said, I might have to take 3 students this year just so I can also continue my relationship with her. And that's what I love to hear from our tutors.
And I think a lot of people don't really understand, at least the statistics in Arkansas, how many children are behind in the 3rd grade already.
Yes.
So elaborate a little bit on how many children are there really that there's a problem with reading?
So when we think about the reading disparities in Arkansas, one of the things that we think about is the fact that a little over 60% of our students do not read over on grade level. For me, that's disheartening.
Absolutely.
I cannot even begin to tell you the emotionally how that makes me feel. And so to think about that percentage of our students within our state not reading on grade level, it really was one of the things that propelled me to think about this position and anything that I could bring to this position to really help us think about as our state how we can improve reading. And so one of the things that we have thought about, and I hear this from our community members all the time, they're like, well, if the schools could just do more. But the things that I often say, especially as a former public school teacher, is the fact that it's not just the school's responsibility. And I think that that's one of the messages that we have to get across to individuals within our community. I became a good reader because my parents had books in the home for us. I became a good reader because we had a family friend who insisted on taking us and their daughters to the library in the summer. I became a good reader because I always had a library card. I became a good reader because my church insisted that we would read in our Bible study lessons. I became a good reader because my parents also made sure we read in the summers and after school. Okay? And so I also became a good reader because I had great reading teachers. But it takes all of that together to make for a good reader. So if we only rely on our teachers, then we have this gap.
Right.
Thinking about what's happening in after school, out of school time in the summer, what's happening in the evenings at home. And we have to think about why do we have those gaps and how can we best chip in as a community of individuals to fill that gap. And so oftentimes when people approach me and they say that, if these schools, I immediately say, well, it takes a team approach. And I just remind them of that. And that's why our work is important. I don't see our work going away, period. Because there will always be a family in which the guardians have to work. And maybe they work 2 or 3 jobs and don't have time to sit down and read with their child. There will always be kids in out-of-school time programs, whether they're after-school programs or summer programs, who will have the opportunity to do some literacy work. What I do see happening is our vision being accomplished and getting us to the point where all of our third graders are reading proficiently, because I truly believe that should and could happen. And we have to make it happen because for our kids, they deserve for that to happen.
And I think it's important for those of us that maybe you're an employer or maybe you're a young person looking at, I want to be an entrepreneur and start a business or whatever. These kids are the future employees.
Of course.
And you want kids that are proficient at reading because it leads to so many other things that are healthy in life.
Yes.
And I think it's just super valuable to realize that the commitment for one of your mentors is 30 minutes a week.
It is 30 minutes per week per child, so they have 2 kids,
Okay.
so it's 1 hour a week.
1 hour a week.
For 10 or 20 weeks. And let me tell you, that the over 400 tutors that we have in our log who do it, they love that time. They love it.
And I think a lot of people look at tutoring, oh, I don't know about that, and they think back to when they were in school. But
Yes.
this is reading a 3rd grade level book with a kid. It's a fun book. It's not a science book in college or something that didn't interest you. This is easy to do. It shouldn't be scary.
And that is correct. And I think all of our tutors will say it's not scary. And so one of the things that our individuals, even our board members who tutor, and I will be tutoring this fall and I'm so excited, but one of the things about it is you get to go in an elementary school. Who didn't love being in elementary schools? I mean, they're some of the most fantastic places in the world. And so you get to be in an elementary school. You get to work with a tutor ambassador who has the opportunity to develop this relationship, this mentoring relationship with you. You get connected to 2 kids. You get to allow them, you get to know them. You get to allow them to pick picture books and other content-driven books of interest to them. Reading that book with them, having an opportunity to hear them read, you share information, ask them some questions. It's just a fun experience. Many of our business partners from the community who allow their staff to take time out to do this, one of the things that they talk about is the joy it brings their staff. So even in the workplace, we have found that individuals like this, because they have staff who are like, I'm happy that my business allows me to do this, and they bring that joy back to their business. Also, when we think about businesses, thinking about that workforce is important because we are sowing the seeds in these young people right now that we don't know what it's going to lead to in the future. But one of the things that we know is that getting them on grade level will lead to success for graduation, entering college, or the workforce.
And I think it's super important also in this, that multi-generational approach.
Yes.
Because I think that there's a lot of stereotypes that go around, oh, the millennials this or this generation this or whatever. Getting these communities together, because I think for me, as a 46-year-old, there's a lot I can learn from a third grader or a second grader. It doesn't sound right, but I think there's a great connection to start crossing some of those lines, and also keeps me young a little bit. So
yes. I've been around individuals who are in their 70s and 80s, both in Waco and here. And one of the things that they've told me, their formula for longevity is you've got to be around some young people. And so being around those kids, it is amazing how it just energizes you, how it helps you to really think about a different perspective. And that's one of the things that we like about our multi-generational approach, is the fact that it does reconnect individuals who are retired, who are in their mid-40s, who are some in their late 20s, to thinking about what was time like for me in our schools. The other piece that comes to me as you said that, though, is sometimes, especially if we don't have kids in schools, we become disconnected to what's happening in our schools. And so one of the things I also like about our work is the fact that it keeps people involved in our community, knowing what's going on in our schools and school districts, and wanting to think about how can they be advocates for children and families in our school districts and our schools. That's very important.
So now that we've got everyone excited about this, what's the best way for someone to look up you guys and to figure out how to get plugged in?
Okay. One of the things I would encourage them to do is to check out our website. It's arkidsread.org. We have great information on there about our program, what we do, how to volunteer, and even how to donate to our cause. Also, I would encourage people to follow us on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Yes, Instagram. And so I'd be happy for people to follow us and to learn more about our work. We would love for members of our community to be engaged with us, because the reality for our work is our success is determined by the individuals who are part of our mission and really putting forth our vision.
So, Dionne, thank you so much for taking the time just to come here and tell your story about how you started chasing your God-given dream, and about how others can jump in and really chase theirs, but at the same time really fighting a difficult battle that's going on nationwide.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Every Arkansan podcast. I think it's so important for us to remember that the key is that we're planting the trees that our kids are going to sit under in the future. And Dr. Jackson's story is making sure every kid in Arkansas can read at the third grade level in the third grade so that they can have a bright future down the road. I hope you get involved and start investing in the dreams of every Arkansan.